So in today's lesson, we're going to look at how consumption and ownership of paraphernalia has influenced the sense of identity. And what we're really going to be focusing on is that sense of identity for NRIs, PIOs, as well as identity for Indians within India. So we're going to be looking at cultural identity, national identity, and also influences of westernization within that identity as well. So a big part of Bollywood is, as we've kind of looked at, is that its role in shaping that national identity. And the consumptions of films and paraphernalia have always kind of been there to help to reinforce fundamental aspects of Indian culture, influencing the way Indians behave and are socialized. So as we've kind of already looked at, Bollywood was really that kind of central focus initially before when the British were there as a kind of a representation of true Indianness or Indian culture, and it was really seen as that projection of what that cultural identity was. And then after the kind of during the leaving of the British Empire, so around the 1940s, you know, when Bollywood was doing that kind of nationalistic film centered around independence, sovereignty, and that kind of stuff. And then definitely after the British left as well, where it was really dealing with those more complex questions of what the Indian national identity was. It's always been, and pretty much since that, it really cemented that idea that Bollywood was a representation of Indian culture, but also Indian nationhood and nationalism. So it's always kind of been presented as that, and so therefore it's a really fundamental way of reinforcing those cultural ideas, and it really also influences, therefore, especially for NRIs and PIOs, Indian behaviour and how they are socialised. A lot of NRIs and PIOs, as we've looked at, have a connection to their culture through Bollywood, and so that definitely has a play on socialising them. So through the purchasing of DVDs, music, and watching the films, it exposes Indians within and outside of India to perpetuated perceptions and understandings of national Indian identity and what cultural identity is, and how kind of Indian culture should be played out. And so the purchasing of posters and products associated with the films, as well as magazines, clothings, and the stars associated brands. This enables the audiences to connect with Bollywood and to tailor their personal identity to meet Bollywood's projected national Indian identity. So the hanging of the posters like this one here really kind of helps to represent what Indians are, what they look like, some of their core values, and obviously the dress. And this is something we're going to come back to, the way saris look within films, and that kind of changing way that they look is definitely influencing identity as well, and the way that that is consumed is shaping that identity as well. Okay, so obviously, the consumption of these films, the establishment of language, religion, customs, and traditions is kind of perpetuated through Bollywood. So mainly here what we're looking at is the consumption of films and the consumption of the music that are tied to those films. So obviously the use of Hindustani removes Bollywood from any one location, and then so therefore it contributes to that national identity, especially when the British left, and that's kind of contributed to Hindu being recognised as the national language within India. Bollywood has a massive part to play in that, and by doing that, Bollywood has, like I said, also removed itself from any one location, and therefore is not really seen as a Bombay or Mumbai representation, but as an Indian representation. It's really that use of that language really helped it to go into that kind of national level, and because of that, it's been able to be projected as a national identity. Also, by including English within the films, which we've seen in Love Ajkal, and if you've watched Student of the Year and Queen, you would have also seen English throughout those films as well. It also helps to break down language diversity and barriers, especially for urban middle-class Indians living in major cities. A lot of Indians, this might be something you don't know, but India, the largest English-speaking nation in the world is India. So a lot of Indians also speak English, partly due to the British colonisation, but also that helps NRIs and PIOs to connect to Bollywood films as well, because obviously the ones living in Western worlds would speak English, and so that definitely allows them to connect as well. And then the projection of religion, customs, and traditions consistently throughout the films enables NRIs and PIOs in Western countries to have a connection to their Indian cultural identity. So both from watching the films, but also through ownership and consumption of music. As remember, music usually reflects the internal mythologies of the film. So the songs are about romance, they're about family values, they're about, following your heart, following your traditions, following your customs, because those the music are based on those kind of internal mythologies, which are generally centered around Indian cultural attitudes, values, and beliefs. The consumption of that songs helps to perpetuate that Indian culture, but then also helps to or allows Indians to identify with that, because it's like projecting that this is something that you believe and this is something you feel. A lot of the times we'll listen to music and we'll connect with the ideas that are within it. And having Bollywood music based off the films that are centered around those Indian cultural values really helps Indians to connect with and identify with their culture. And then in addition to this, the continual presence and perpetuation of the importance of NRIs in maintaining Indian traditions and culture is reinforced through the mythologies. So a really good example of this is Lavaj Kal. So if you remember the juxtaposition of the older NRI Veer, so that was the guy wearing the Sikh turban, with the younger NRI Jai, who was the main male character. And how Veer constantly projected the loss of values of love and romance with Western ways, and how it's important that he follows traditional Indian values. And you see that through the way Veer kind of tells his story of how he fell in love at first sight with the female character, and then how Jai initially kind of reacts as that being so ridiculous and stupid, but that throughout as the film goes, that's kind of who he is, and that idea that NRIs should retain their cultural identity is consistently portrayed throughout Bollywood films. And so just the pure consumption of films and posters, and I'll just quickly go back to this one. As you can see, they're both wearing traditional Indian clothing or cultural Indian clothing. And so, the constant projection of, connecting with your cultural identity is a idea that's perpetuated throughout all of these films. And so therefore it really helps NRIs to connect with that and PIOs to connect with that, because it allows them, it really kind of expresses their experiences within Western countries, and so it allows them to connect to those cultural values and the ideas of Indian identity and Indian nationhood and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously you've got the internal mythologies as well. So they play an important role in the creation of India's national identity. They really help to shape, what the ideas around what is important for Indians as a culture, as a nation, as an identity. And they really help that to facilitate that discussion, because whenever mythologies start to shift or change, as we're going to come and see, with that increasing of individualism and sexualization of women, there's a discussion around whether or not that is reflective of Indian cultural ideas. And so, it's allowing for that discussion, that ideas of, what is nationhood, what is identity, what is culture within India. And so these films really do help to connect to that, and it is seen as a massive part as being a reflection of Indian cultural identity. And so it's because it's seen as that reflection of cultural identity, therefore when Indians consume it, it's that way of connecting to that cultural identity as well. And we can see this through the stories, the plot, and the character conventions in Bollywood, which reflect the struggles of India at a particular time, which therefore is binding together the Indian nation through pop culture. So we've got examples of this, like through valorizing the poor, which was kind of the first thing that they did during, the British colonization, trying to convince, and once they left, the building up of India as a nation, giving these kind of national ideas in which Indians could kind of rally around and help to build their nation and their identity. And then obviously also letting the poor to connect with those ideas and see themselves as something as being prominent within the development of India as a nation. And then you've moved that from that to east to west mentality, the idea that Indian culture was being undermined by Western culture, which is still partly continued to today, although not as much. And then terrorism now being a big aspect of Bollywood and being a big aspect of Bollywood films today. Again, kind of like pairing, the Indian nationhood and the strength of the country and their values and their culture compared to terrorism, and kind of what's trying to undermine that as well. And then again, the consumption of these films really helps people to identify with those nationalistic attitudes and shapes their ideas and understandings of their culture, but also of their nation, so of India as a whole. And then lastly, we've got westernization as being, as we know, it's infiltrating throughout Bollywood films, and that is definitely having an impact or an influence on Indian cultural identity, and the consumption of these films is shaping the identity of those that consume it as well. So, as we know, the desire of Bollywood to appeal to NRIs and PIOs and Western audiences is leading to a commodified and globalized version of Indian nationalism. So that's something that we should be fairly aware with now, that the inclusion of Western ideals and cultural values. And so this has changed the values perpetuated in Bollywood films, so consequently creating shifts in the Indian cultural identity. And this is because even though that there's an increasing influence of westernization in Bollywood films, that hasn't taken away from the fact that Bollywood is still seen as this cultural production, or this cultural representation, this national representation of Indian culture, of Indian values, of Indian society. And so that's where you've kind of got this influence that westernization is happening, because within India and outside of India, Bollywood is still seen as being really Indian. But then you've got these subtle infiltrating Western ideals, Western values, which means it would definitely be having an impact on Indian cultural identity. So individualism is increasingly promoted in Bollywood, which is moving away from Indian collectivism, so moving away from the extended family and the desires of the family and the community over the individual, and moving definitely more to what the individual desires and wants. And this can be seen through the changes of the role of the family within the main characters' lives, as well as greater focuses on individual desires over the family. So we can see the growth of individualism, especially definitely through the mythology of romance within films. And materialism and consumerism are also becoming more prominent. So this is definitely because, or we can see this through product placement and growing product placement throughout Bollywood films, as well as endorsements of products and brands by the stars. And on top of this, we can also see this through the consumer-driven and less conservative nature of the films. So especially in Student of the Year, you also see it in Love Ajkal. We saw it a bit in Humpty Sharma when we watched that in Year 11. There's lots of consumerist natures and ideals within those films. They're not, just that representation of middle class or wealthy NRIs and PIOs is demonstrating that consumerist nature as well. They've got good clothing, they've got good cars, they've got good schooling, good jewelry, all that kind of things. It's really focused around that consumerist nature. And if we think back to Humpty Sharma, again, if you can't remember it too much, I recommend watching it again. One of the big kind of storylines or ideas is that the main character wanted to buy a car. So consumerism is becoming a bigger part within Bollywood films, and that's definitely an influence of westernization. And then the values perpetuated in Bollywood correlates with the Indian national identity. Combining with the purchasing of paraphernalia serves to heighten the shift in Indian national identity. So you combine all of these mythologies that are being perpetuated within these films, and that slight shift that is including westernization. Add to that the purchasing of paraphernalia, which therefore serves to maintain that perpetuation of those cultural values. So a great example looking back here is this clothing, the sari. Now, we've kind of already discussed this, but the way women look in Bollywood films now is very different to how they looked just even 10 years ago. You wouldn't really see their stomach within the films. Their arms would be more covered, their breasts would be more covered. We're seeing a lot more of their skin now. And that's being reflected in the consumption of Bollywood as well, because saris, lots of saris within India kind of made to look like saris that were in films. So once a popular Bollywood film is made, clothing and especially female saris will be made to emulate what was on the screen. And so then people can purchase those pieces of clothing to identify with and connect with the film that they watched, which means that that's kind of perpetuating that shift in cultural identity as well, because the women are starting to look more revealing, which means that there's that influence of Western identity that's coming more greater throughout the films and through how they're consuming the films and the paraphernalia tied with that as well. This can especially be seen in the working class Indians living in India, as they feel that whilst the films influence them, they no longer reflect the lives of the Indian mass, which is facilitating the growing influence of westernization in India. And this is something we're going to touch on a lot more as well, the influences the Bollywood films are having on the society and culture in general. But the main things to kind of take away from this is the consumption of the films and the songs are big parts in kind of perpetuating and maintaining cultural and national identity. And then the consumption of the paraphernalia associated with the film, so clothing, magazines, posters, is a means in which people can connect to and identify themselves with that nationalistic cultural identity that Bollywood is perpetuating. So, and with that, on top of that, the growing influences of westernization in these films means that cultural identity, that national identity, is shifting slightly, and that the consumption of paraphernalia that is associated with Bollywood films, like the brands associated with stars, like the clothing that's starting to shift to be more Western in its style, means that the identity or cultural identity or national identity of Indians is shifting a little bit. It's moving away from a more traditional kind of stance of cultural identity to a more Western stance of cultural identity.